Those who joined us in person and online for today's event. I'm really excited to welcome our speakers today. We have Ray Martens, Gunjan Seth, and Sam Micsinszki. Close. Micsinszki, all right. As our speakers for today's session. So, quick introduction to those who are joining us today. Ray Martens is a knowledge broker with Kids Brain Health Network, Child Health or CanChild, and the University of Calgary. She oversees the community of practice for the Family Engagement and Research Training Program. We have Gunjan as well, who's a parent of an individual with autism and ADHD. She's associated with the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital, as well as a family leader, family as faculty, family mentor, and family advisory committee co-chair at the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital. She's also a parent advisor with Echo Ontario Autism. And our third speaker for today's session is Sam, who's a registered nurse and currently a postdoctoral fellow at CanChild and the School of Rehabilitation Science at McMaster University. And her work includes patients and families with different backgrounds and experiences, and she strives to conduct research that's relevant as well as impactful. So I'd like everyone to join us in welcoming our speakers today. Our topic is the importance of building authentic and meaningful relationships between families and researchers. So I'm going to hand over the session now to our presenters.
It's an absolute honor to be here today and quite grateful for the experience of getting to know Toronto a little bit deeper, as it's been a couple of years pre-pandemic since I've left. But so we welcome you to the space, but we also want to ensure that this is a space where you can ask questions along the way and things like that. So we really want this to be more of a conversation. I'm Jackie Say. I'm Ray Martens, Gunjan, and this is Sam. For anyone who's looking on the camera, I am a white woman in a dress. Sam is in a green sweater with brown hair, and Gunjan's wearing a red shirt with dark hair as well. And so just to continue on here, we would like to do a land acknowledgement, and I just bring to you my experiences as someone who has the privilege of living, working, and playing in Treaty 7 territory in Calgary, Alberta. And I would love for you to take an opportunity to learn more about the experiences of the people and the land in Calgary and take that time today. And one thing that we like to do to start things off is just to do just a brief introduction and have people get to know each other. We want to have that space as they start to the conversation. And moment, if you need it, you can step out of the room. That's totally okay. When we're online, this is actually our first sort of in-person session in a really long time, and a lot of our first time seeing each other. So we're really used to online Zoom sessions. So in a Zoom session, I would say, like, you can turn your camera off. That's a different thing in person. So if you need to, just like take a moment or step out of the room, that's totally okay.
Can I add something in this context? So great insights from Sam. I just want to build something that is experience based. So we're all humans, and the way I perceive safety may be different from yours. It looks different, it feels different. It's totally different for every human. But I think the intent in this presentation is like Sam mentioned. So our intent is to make this space very safe and comfortable for you, very welcoming, very inclusive, and you feel well supported during this brief experience. But we really don't know what is actually happening in your soul. We cannot perceive it. So before we start this journey, I really want to acknowledge that we have no intent to hurt anyone's emotion in this process. We are all humans. We do experience vulnerable experiences, and we are not aware of that.
The capstone experience through the MAHS program is an opportunity for students to work.
Sorry, that's okay. So the intent is that we are all humans. So we are trying our best to create a very safe space for every human in this universe. But we really don't know how our actions can impact others. So we're respecting that. And in this process, you may experience those moments, those emotions, and we have no intent to do that. So I really want to apologize in advance if by any chance our emotions, our words, our language can come and can be, emotionally draining for you.
And just to build on what Gunjan was mentioning as well too, one thing that doesn't make it to the literature a lot is the notion of the experiences that people with lived experience have in these spaces, especially when they are introduced to the concept initially. Some of the things that I come across with it as being a knowledge broker in this context is that I'm not necessarily in the course per se, but I'm someone who's there to build relationships not only within the course, but beyond that. And some of the things that have come really as things that I've seen as being kind of calculable, but also very common across the board is there's an opportunity for discovery where people suddenly realize, oh my goodness, this system that constantly anonymizes us in many ways, where, as someone who has been a frequent user of healthcare, in some cases I'm referred to as mom and I'm no longer Ray. That has the capacity to see yourself as kind of an act of care and a function of care, and that's it. And to suddenly understand the fact that no, your experiences have value is something that can be quite a cathartic experience, and in some cases very overwhelming for some people along the way, especially in that introduction space, because you come to understand that people talk about things like their professional accreditations and things like that, and someone says, but I don't have letters behind my name. But that also is a barrier that we talk about in terms of saying that doesn't mean you don't have value in this space, and that's what we do when we try to connect with people. And so, Sam, would you like to talk a little bit more about how we define family engagement in research?
Yeah. So when we talk about family engagement in research, we have the patient/family here. And so when we talk about this, it's about partnering with patients and families. So patient you might think of as someone you encounter in a hospital or in a clinic setting, but we also often in the literature talk about patient as a community member. So as a parent or a child with a disability or youth with a disability. And then when we're talking about families, we're referring to parents, but also siblings, grandparents, people who are within that sort of person's subjective sphere of what family means. And so when we talk about patients and families engaging in research, we mean those people are partnering with researchers and research teams all the way through the research process. So starting right from the beginning of, a parent or a family member coming up with a research question, approaching a team member, that's sometimes how it happens, and then, working through all the stages of the research process from ethics and data collection and data analysis all the way to knowledge translation. And it's to better understand their experiences and priorities. And so patients and families can help us as researchers understand what priorities there are and what questions they have. And this is a really interesting sort of thing that I didn't realize until I was in my PhD. So my PhD is from the University of Toronto in the nursing department. I was doing a PhD in sleep, and I came up with the question. It was really supported in the literature that there was this gap, and then I was doing data collection, and I heard from parents. So my thesis was on sleep in parents of kids with autism, and I was phoning parents to get them to complete my survey, and parents were like, no, well, this isn't important for, it's not my sleep, it's my kid's sleep. That's the thing. And I was like, it was like a light bulb moment. Like, I didn't include patients and families to understand what their priorities were. I was just looking at the literature. So I think it was that light bulb moment that we need patients and families to help us inform the research, not just from an evidence perspective, but also from their lived experience perspective.
I just want to add in this context, so I'm a parent of a child with autism and ADHD, and I'm also a proud immigrant. I have many intersectionalities, and due to that, I have many barriers, struggles, and challenges. So when I talk about family patient engagement research, it gives me a voice to share my real lived authentic experiences, and it helps me to create those spaces where I can really acknowledge my own emotions and also support others. The goal is to create a system that can improve the lives of everyone in the system, not only the parents, not only the clients, but also our clinicians, our researchers, every stakeholder in the system. And that could only happen if we have true, authentic partnerships and engagement. And this is the reason we are here, because this process helps us to move in that direction that I'm talking to you. So this is so meaningful, so powerful that if we really invite voices from people who are really going through that journey, we are including them in all the discussions, in all the talks, and creating a system which is well supporting the needs of every human in this universe.
I don't think we could have had a better description of the slide that we have up here. This is actually, so I mean, this comes without words, but I will add this as well too, that just the fact that this is part of a knowledge tool that was co-created by people with lived experience as well as researchers as a part of the course. Their end of their 10-week term is to create that final project, which is a knowledge tool about family engagement. So this comes from people who have co-designed together. Next slide. Because as things go, and thank you, Francine, for this slide, because I'm going to use it for the rest of my days. There's something to be said about you can design with the best of intentions on so many levels and feel like you did the thorough work. But at the same time, to some degree, there is always that inherent risk of somebody who is just seeing animal butts. So we need to think about the fact that and understand that these experiences aren't about competing with one another, but they're complementary and they help build together. Next slide. Because as things tend to move, our understanding of knowledge acquisition is evolving over time. And that is coming to understand the fact that it used to be where it was an object and an expert and dissemination coming from the expert to the people. But we come to know and understand in this age of information that has increased in complexity and we have a larger, broader understanding. And if you can move to next slide. And that is understanding the fact that interacting with subjects is something that we can all collectively do together. And not only that, it's the fact that the exchanges can be so broad and so unique along the way. And adding to that as well too is that being a knower in this space is also incredibly beneficial. And that's something that I have the pleasure within my role to know and understand a lot better, is that there is a psychological benefit in many ways to the notion of partnership and contributions. And I think that there's something to be said that we need to analyze this to a much larger degree than we actually do. And because really at the end of the day, part of the biggest question ends up being in terms of how to do engagement is somebody always asks. And there's really no like official recipe, like follow this exactly to the letter and it's always going to work out every time. That's just not how this works. That's not how relationship building works to begin with. But if we move to the next slide, this actually comes from a conversation I made, and I'm happy to share this as well too with anybody. I found it on TikTok, the best raisin bread recipe ever. I was so excited about it. And I got to thinking about how much that experience was something that aligned very well with the notion of family engagement. Actually, so much so I shared this on Twitter, and somebody actually ended up making a knowledge tool specifically about this example that I'm about to provide. If you go into Google and you Google raisin bread, you will find over 27 million hits. For something so simplistic in life, what exactly does that mean? You have people who have learned from their own experiences and had their own values. You have very common tools that are just basically universal. You need flour, you need yeast, yada, yada. You need raisins for raisin bread. But at the same point as well, too, though there are slight deviations from original recipes because people find things that work for them in their context, things that didn't work in the past. They don't have access to all the tools that they need. They still make raisin bread. It's just that they use what they have within their skill sets, their knowledge, their values, and the tools they have at hand. And all of those things still eventually make raisin bread. It's just that there is something to be said about the fact that we all eventually get there. It just takes a unique set of tools to some measure as well, too. Somebody called me out on this actually on Twitter recently about this, and they had said that they thought that this meant that I was saying that patients needed to be molded. And I said, that's far from it. That's far from what I had in mind. The idea really ended up being, and I had a space to really talk about this to a greater depth, and that was the idea that it was the process that we are so uniquely attached to as human beings. We want to be able to do this right, and we want to be able to do this well. But at the same point as well, too, it's to understand the fact that the patients are not bred. They are growing in their own way. They're doing their own thing. I need another analogy specifically for them, but at the same time, that it's so uniquely varied that I don't think I'd be able to give enough credit to that space. But the act of engagement has so much to benefit from the idea that we bring so much together to create such a unified concept overall. Next slide.
Thank you, Ray. Can I just say something?
For sure, yeah.
Thank you. So, great example. I love your example. Just I'm curious from the group. Do you think our pace is fine? You're comfortable with this space? Do you have any questions? And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask any questions. We welcome your thoughts, so please feel free to ask them. And if you're not comfortable sharing now, you may share it later, anytime when you're ready to ask.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Gunjan.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank
That's
you.
marvelous. And I think that you described something that's so valuable in this space, is the fact that we belong in each other's spaces. And that is something that we really want to emphasize in this as well too, is the fact that that also does come with some level of vulnerability, and the fact that in many systems we talk about there being a certain restriction to that where it needs to be done. You cannot share certain things for the sake of professionalism, but to some degree, sharing that you have a dog or 2 kids is probably not going to be the giant breaker of boundaries that we often claim that it can be. So there is definitely something to be said about sharing and cultivating a shared humanity in this space as well too.
Sam, do you want to add something in this context?
Yeah, I was actually just gonna ask, like, are people, are any of you clinicians or you're in training? Do you feel comfortable as a clinician or as a researcher in this space to share about yourself? Like, I know we started with sort of that open, you know, who I am and comfort level, but like, do you have any reservations about what Ray just said and like bringing yourself as a whole person to the table? Because I think that can be really uncomfortable sometimes. Yeah, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. But I really already love what you're doing. So I feel very safe. I just was thinking of what you, like the one example you brought, like yeah. I'm sometimes referred as mom in the healthcare setting, and I feel guilty for that, you know, because I have so many different souls as well, and listening to this is really, I love it. The problem is also that you have to have the clinician, and we are like in the emergency department, and it's sometimes just back-to-back patients, and you get screamed upon because you have like waiting times of like 13 hours or something, and it's literally hard to figure out the names of the parent, and sometimes if you try to use it, you would just make a wrong decision. So you call the mom with the surname of the kid, and she's like, "That is not mine. That's from my ex-husband." You don't have the time to figure that out. Although I'm working in migrant equity, so I'm like really super open to all the equity topics, and I love them, and I think they're important for parents too. I just feel there is sometimes just this feeling of being completely insufficient as clinicians, because you just can't match all the needs that are surrounding you. That is one thing. And then the second thing that came up in my mind was that you were mentioning is borders. And when I'm originally from Switzerland, and when I came here, I had to do 500 e-learnings for tickets. And one was about borders. And it was like, even a question and answer, is this considered a crossing of borders? Is this considered a crossing of borders? I was like, people seem to be so aware of borders, and I should respect them. And this also limits my space to creatively acknowledge the individual in front of me. One example from Switzerland is I was working on oncology, and the child died, and I knew the family relatively well. So when the child was dead, I sang a religious song for the family. And when I went to the funeral of the kid, the mom was crying and hugging him, was saying this was so beautiful. She keeps thinking of it. And in this e-learning that I did here, this would be completely prohibited. It would be like religious stuff, crossing of borders. You're not a musician, you're the clinician, you know. So that is another equivocal thing that I'm thinking of when I'm listening to you.
Absolutely, and I completely agree. your examples were absolutely valuable and vital. I wanted to share an example for your example. So this is actually, the hoodie picture is something that my first experience in a research setting at a conference. I didn't know I didn't know and let alone understand what it meant to be in that space and understand that there was a sense of power from that. And I think that's kind of where this comes from. While there are some things where you can strategize about the ethical boundaries and stuff, and I completely get it, as someone who was raised a frequent flyer in the emergency room, I can only imagine how much gets packed into your day, and all the more so in a global pandemic. But in that space, what ended up happening was two things. The person who was initially my boss came up and gave me a hug, and I panicked for the brief moment, and I would just kind of went, is this even sanctioned? I mean, I laugh about that now, but at the same time, that's very much how I felt. And I remember being asked a question, and just like a group circle thing, this lovely UBC researcher just asked me a perfectly normal question, and I panicked in the moment. And if I was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, I would have put the hood over my head, closed the toggles together, and went, I don't know, I'm just a mom. And that in itself was something that I needed to kind of work through a little bit. But I think there is something to be said about, it's never going to be about an immediate transition in many ways. And because this is complicated, it's hugely complicated in many respects. At the same time, I think there are facets of it that are very much a social movement where you can see a broader picture and experience and stuff like that as well too. But that does come with a kind of a lot of work and listening and collaborating and things like that, where those things begin to change and perceptions fall away. I completely wholeheartedly, we all empathize, I think, with that as well too. I don't know if you have any perspective to lend to that as well, Sam.
I just want to thank you for sharing that, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I think that that's part of what we want to sort of get you to come away with here. If you come away with anything, it's that we're all humans, and that when you're inviting people into research spaces, it's a very same principle as in other spheres, like as in clinician, in your other aspects of your lives, right? It's the same kind of idea. We want people to feel welcome in these spaces and that they belong, and that they can have the ability to share those things without fear of crossing a boundary or, going to the principal's office, getting in trouble, right? We want people to feel comfortable in those spaces, that we can work together in a way that feels good. We don't want them to come into our spaces and, have them share their story, but feel really bad about it. That would feel really icky as a researcher. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's coming away with that sense of inviting people in and having them feel good about the partnership.
Absolutely. And I think to some degree as well too, there's something to be said about the pace of those experiences as well too, and how to some degree sharing those limitations can be something that is a reality, like that many people will, like with lived experience, will kind of say like, okay, I get it. I mean, I don't agree with it, but I get it. And to be very human in that respect definitely is helpful as well too. Now we do actually have a comment. I'm sorry, Gunjan, but that we were going to address from the comments.
Yes, Rebecca, I see your hand is raised. I just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to unmute yourself.
Yes, hi everyone. So I'm a pediatric emergency nurse. So I practice using a family-centered model of care. And so that centers the needs of both the patient as well as the family when you're planning and delivering the care. And I know we have a lot to learn from what's left of the presentation, but so far it sounds like there are a lot of parallels between the family-centered model of care and engaging families and children and youth in research. And so I just wanted to say that I really appreciated the analogy that you gave with, I'm not sure what you were baking, if it was a bread or a loaf, but how different people might adapt it differently on what's needed, just because I find that as a clinician, like, of course, you're going to adapt your approach to each patient and family because everybody's arriving with different experiences and viewpoints and needs. And so I can imagine that that would be very similar in the research context as well.
I really appreciate your comment there, Rebecca, because it's just some measure as well to say that, like, I'm a firm believer in the notion that partnership in research is an extension of patient and family-centered care. But I know there are people who powerfully disagree with me in that respect as well too. So to find a buddy, I'm high-fiving you in my mind right now. But at the same time, yeah, no, you are absolutely right in that respect as well too, is that there are a lot of parallels in terms of trying to find trust in very quick spaces along the way. And that's the one thing that we do within the course, is within those 10 weeks that you have that opportunity to collaborate, and to do so in a very safe space as well too. Should anything arise, there's always somebody there to support you along the way. And so that's why we understand it's just in that space we give you opportunity to practice, essentially, is what I kind of wanted to mention as well too.
Yeah, I just want to add that, like Ray, I want to expand on that. So she shared such a great insight. I love the insight she shared about the parallels and how to have client and family-centered care model with so many other parallels. So it's not easy. It's a process. It's a journey. And I think when we were talking about check-in, this is the first step you are doing to build that partnership. You're welcoming the other party. And I will not call it other party, being honest with you. I will call it, you're welcoming your true partners. I will call it a true partner, because if you're really going to have an engagement, you really need true partners. So you're inviting them, welcoming them, and checking with them as often as can you do. Because it's just checking we need as human. We need that mental health support wherever we go. So when you're checking in with them, how are they doing? How are they feeling? And just creating that space and respecting that space, making them feel included in that space is so vital to, if you have to create a client and family-centered care of model in any engagement. So I think for me, when I talk about check-in is your first step to build that trust, authenticity, compassion, and create and respect that space for each stakeholder in that engagement. And this really helped me. If I see my journey, I see I have many intersectionalities, many barriers, but what helped me to share my voice in engagement or any other engagement is that space that welcomed me, that embraced me, that included me, that listened deeply to my thoughts and my challenges. So it's a process, and I love the way she acknowledged that, she experienced that, and she shared in a space like this. So thank you, Rebecca, for sharing that.
Absolutely. And what's really unique about this as well too is that some work that's going on in CanChild is reconfiguring an old patient and family-centered care measure that's been validated. Some of you may be familiar with MPOC, Measures of Processes of Care. That has not been adapted since the 1990s. And while fashion has made its resurgence back, so should measures in that respect. And so we've had opportunity to participate in a lot of focus groups with families. And one of the things that dynamics that was really interesting about the fact is for a measure that was created in the 90s when we still had dial-up internet comparatively to now, where it's some of the impressions that I've gotten initially from the work so far has been this idea that it's not so much about about knowledge acquisition in that way, like to draw all of your information specifically from a singular source, but it's about validation and support and connection, and how much that has changed over time as well too. Because we know and understand the fact that there are varying factors within the world of policy that support an idea of collaboration. And one of them for me that I'm very much an advocate for is the notion of the UNCRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as well as the Convention on the Rights of Children. We know through these types of conventions that we have signed on to that we don't necessarily do the greatest job at. And if you want more conversation about that, Sam and I will be talking tomorrow with the ECHO team specifically about ableism in healthcare, but that's for conversation literally for another day. But the one thing that they talk about is nothing about us without us. And I think that if we are going to use that term in a lot of healthcare design, co-design, engagement, all of those things, we need to really live and understand and breathe those words as putting something that has meaning in it, because there is it has a history of fighting to be heard to begin with. And so we need to recognize that within the work that we do when it comes to partnership. Next slide. Now, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this quote, but if you watch the show Ted Lasso, this one became very popular as well too over time. I am a big fan of the notion of what it means to contemplate the idea of being curious and not judgmental, which seems kind of nebulous in its own right, but I wanted to contextualize this a few ways. So I, in young adulthood, had fancied myself someone who could be potentially a future actor, and that failed miserably, but that's a whole other story. But I actually did meet my spouse in a mime troupe, and at that point, we learned a lot about the notion of improv and how to have continued conversations. And one of them was definitely yes and how you continue to talk about the idea of creating one aspect of the story and listening to the next person, and how that continuation between the two of you is an opportunity to not only prompt creativity, but to continue the conversation that really forces people to listen. Another facet of improv that is one that is actually mentioned in Brian Goldman's book, The Power of Teamwork, which is another actually really great book that I highly recommend people checking out, is how, the notion of the question and how that offers people space to think about pulling more information out of a person and prompting someone to be more creative in that space as well too. All of those things help to culminate the idea that the more questions you ask, the notion of tell me more helps to fill holes that we might not necessarily be comfortable with. And that's something that we all kind of come with, especially when it comes to starting relationships. And especially if someone has not necessarily had the best experiences in healthcare settings and things like that, sometimes they need that opportunity to pull a little bit more information out, and then you can start to see the full story kind of lay out in many respects as well too. So that's one quality that we definitely espouse here as well too. Because setting things up along the way, there are different goals that come in mind when it comes to different settings, like emergency room settings, when it means to develop a relationship. But from a food standpoint, you see it kind of a little bit more blatant, yet at the same time, it's not something that comes to the top of mind either. It's the idea, if you go to a cafe, the way you set your table will end up being more about prompting and facilitating the goal of intimacy between two people. So you tend to see like 2, maybe 3 chairs at most at tables. If you go to a bar, you're going to see a variety of different goals with seating. You're going to see places where you bring groups together. Someone may be on a date, maybe someone's sitting alone. Maybe in some cases it's just like a baseball team or whatever the case. I mean, at that point you see different goals require different ways to set the table, and that becomes a big part of kind of laying the foundations for whatever partnership you are looking to develop.
Just want to add something in this. Sorry, thank you, Ray. Thank you so for touching that on the talk. So just to build on that, so I'm a proud immigrant, and when I came to Canada, I was not sure about any rules, any social rules, and I had immense barriers. And you may interact with families who have many intersectionalities. They have a cultural barrier, they may have a language barrier, and they don't even know ABCD of Canada. They don't know even anything. So you may see some behaviors that you are not even expecting them to do, but they may do that because they even have no idea are they really appropriate in that setting or not. So be not judgmental in that context, please, and please be curious in that process of learning. Why are they doing it, and what's the purpose behind it? There may be a reason, deep reason why they are behaving like that. So I think this all involves a lot of deep listening and deep observation. So I will share something very interesting with you, very honest with you. So I'm from India, and in India, we call people with full name. Like I will not say, so if I say, I will tell you something. I will say Jessica Goldman, for instance. So here we have a culture, this is my observation and my apologies in advance. We can call Jess or maybe Jessica, but in India, people will not do that. And it took so much years for me even just to come to a stage of calling that person with first name or with something shorter than that. And that is because I had a cultural setting expectations in my mind that I did not do that. And that is because of the expectations that I had in my learning journey when I was very young. So the intent here is that, so when you're really curious to know why a family is behaving like this, why a patient is behaving like this, there is a reason. So do not please judge their actions and behavior, and be always curious to explore what is the intent behind that, what's the objective, because behavior is, there is a need to do that. And sometimes we are not aware of it and we make so many judgments. So this is a process that we learn together, open to talk to them if it's possible, have a one-to-one talk to them, explore and learn more about it, because it will really benefit you in this process of supporting families and your own families also.
And I think what this can look like, and so thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really good point. And what this could look like is sometimes I think in research settings, we have like these expectations of how research is supposed to look. And we have our meetings, they're an hour, you come in, you put your hand up. And when someone else comes into that space and they don't abide by the rules that, these unspoken rules of what sort of research settings are traditionally creating, families have stuff going on, they might miss meetings, they might be late to meetings, they might, want to talk about their kids. And I think that like as researchers, it can be uncomfortable to, say what those rules and those expectations are. And I appreciate that example again, because I think it can translate really to how we're approaching research settings in a curiosity way rather than a judgmental way. Instead of saying like, oh, they're late because they don't care, it's like, oh, they're late and I'm curious, how can I support you? And looking a little bit deeper and having that conversation, like Gunjan said, to explore that instead of having this judgment of why that happened. Absolutely, and a really great contextualization of that as well too was I was working on a project where some of our students were a part of the advisory for that particular team. And in one case, this is actually one reason why I like to utilize the aspect of providing feedback to people along the way, especially when you recognize something that even if it's a basic human behavior, it's something that is worth recognizing and saying that that's wonderful that you did it that way. A person wasn't showing up to meetings, and I had a grad student basically come up to me and say, I don't speak parent. I don't even want to remotely pretend that I know what's going on, but this is the circumstance that we find ourselves in. This person hasn't been showing up. It was out of the blue. I cannot get in contact with them at all. What do you think is happening here? Now, knowing this enough about this person, I also knew that it was very, in all likelihood, they were impatient and it was a hasty transition for whatever reason that was. Turns out, yes, that was the case, but for them, that notion of talking to someone and saying, hey, I'm going to be gone for an indeterminate amount of time was not exactly top of the priority list. So it felt like being straight up ghosted, but in reality, this is someone who is just trying to survive on the limited resources they already have. And so I talked to the grad student and said, so this is the script I want you to follow. Just like put your own words to it, but these are the concepts that you need to think about. Hi, I don't know what is going on in your life right now, and I empathize with whatever it is, and it is likely something that is putting you in a very high stress situation. And we just want to reach out and say that we support you in whatever's going on in your life right now. And when you are ready and when you feel like you're okay enough to be a part of the process again, please come back. We will welcome you with open arms regardless of the situation. It was a judgment-free space. It just offered them that opportunity to just say that we are here and connected to you and supporting you regardless of whatever situation that is. And that also comes with planning a little bit to some measure and understanding that sometimes stuff is going to happen. People are going to disappear because that's just the reality that some of these families work with or have in that space as well too. Now, Gunjan, you have some principles that you wanted to share here as well today. How about you? I'll leave this slide to you.
Thank you so much.
Transition there.
Great. Thank you so much. And some great examples, Sam and Ray. And I'm curious to know your thoughts too. Do you have something to build in this context? Do you have any experiences like this too? Yes, please.
I just wanted to add this idea of being judgmental and curious versus being also to yourself. So as researchers, it's ingrained in us to be objective. It's ingrained in us to, not want to know our research participants because we have scope and the context doesn't really, it doesn't really matter because we need to stick within our scope and be objective. So when we think like that and we come into an engagement with patients and families, sometimes we can bring that history with us subconsciously in our interaction. So don't be judgmental to yourself either, and be open and honest with your research partners. They're like, hey, sometimes I'm a little like treating like this like a focus group. I don't mean to. I'm sorry if I do. Because what that does is it breaks down the barriers as well, and we're honest with them about our limitations, and we open up to learning to change those limitations as well as researchers. So I like to flip it a little bit too to say, you know, don't judge yourself too much either. Be kind to yourself. We're all kind of new to this.
I love it. I love it. Like, sorry about
Yep,
me.
no worries.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So when you touch the word kindness, I think it's all about kindness and compassion. I cannot advocate for my son. I cannot advocate for any system if I'm not kind to myself. And this is a lesson I've discovered maybe after a couple of years of my journey with my son. I've been very, I did not even think about my health. I just ignored it. And this is the case, if you will see so many families, caregivers, they just work very, very tirelessly for their loved ones. And they did not think about anything about their existence. So I cannot even express how painful it is, how challenging is this process. But there comes a stage in their life when they realize the need of self-care. So they realize it, and I learned it when I had a medical complication. I had gone through some medical complication, and I learned it. I wish I could have someone at the very beginning of this journey that, Gunjan, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you need some support? And just who could have listened to my deep emotions and thoughts during that beginning of my journey as a parent and caregiver. I think it was not there for me. And I always share with every system I go that we need a system that should be kind to each one of us, not only to the parents, not only to the caregivers, but also to the amazing people who support that. So it's just, I think, I see that be kind to yourself. And if you're kind to yourself, you get some self-reflections. How can you be kind to others also? And it's a process to discover. It's not easy to do that. And I think I spend hours and hours to be kind to myself. But I think for me, I can be kind to any human in this planet. But I may not be as kind to me because for me, I think it's just giving to the system and giving to the system. But after I get hit, I realize the need of being kind to myself. So it's not easy, and just get maybe any moment you get to be kind to yourself. So I'm going to talk now about the 4 principles that, so I volunteer at Holland Bloorview from almost 8 years now. So my son is an outpatient client from almost 10 years there, and we receive a lot of services. I'm a family leader, I'm a family's faculty there, family mentor there, and FSC coach here. So in these different variety of roles, I strongly see what is helping everyone to have a good support and services in the system is incorporating family voices, clients' voices, with a lot of respect and dignity. And we call this client and family centered care of model, which is so powerful to make a positive impact in the lives of families like us. And I see the difference. When I share my voice with a lot of courage and strength, they are also supporting me to share my voice also. So which is a kind of a true partnership they are demonstrating in this engagement and partnership. We are very authentic, and I have seen if we have to really create a client and family centered care kind of model in any engagement, in any space, we really have to create a very respectful space for every person in that engagement. That is the first key we need as a human to be included in that conversation, in that space. And there should be a dignity and transparency of the clarity of information. We assume a lot that we have said this, we have communicated that, but how frequently we do it clearly is missing in the system. So I think clear communication, transparency, and quality of care that we provide to our clients and families makes a lot of difference in their lives. So this is just my experience as a parent, and my apologies in advance. We are all working together in this process of creating a safe and well-supported system for our clients and families. And it's a process. I'm not an expert, I'm just an explorer. And I'm exploring because of my own family, my son's need. I'm not perfect, being honest with you, I'm not perfect. I have, so I simply say that we are all explorers in this space. But are we really open to explore this beautiful journey together? This is a question to think and self-reflect. And I don't want to talk much in depth about that because you are well aware about the basics of client and family-centered care. But at the same time, this is my assumption. I'm also very curious to know, what are you curious to know more about client and family-centered care in this context?
I will add as well too, just complimentary what you mentioned, Gunjan, but also to Francine's point as well, that I know sometimes we come to these conversations, you're like, yeah, but how do I do it? Some facets to consider in terms of those relationships are things like rules of engagement can be a really great asset in terms of setting the table in a way that is safe for everybody in that space. One thing that has met the literature, I know after all the experiences, for example, in the US 2016 election, there was some analysis that was done regarding the idea, can you as people from two different sides of the political spectrum have effective conversations online about politics and things like that? And the answer was absolutely yes. You just have to ensure the fact that people know how to conduct themselves in a respectful manner in that space. And from in that case, for example, for us, we have a Facebook group that has been going on for almost 10 years, actually 10 years next year, called Parents Partnering in Research. And Francine was actually a part of that work back in the day. That is our collective friendship and origin story together there. But that space has been one of collaboration and conversation for almost that amount of time. And I could say from the demographics of people that we support along the way, there are people who embrace subject matter that you may come across in care a lot and from a variety of controversial standpoints. And despite that fact, our level of drama in that time frame I can count on one hand in terms of watching a conversation go off the rails. Beyond that, it has been shockingly minimal by comparison. So when you can create that space that says that this is what we can accept, this is what we don't accept, and I'd be more than happy to share that information with you. I can send, would that be best to send it to you?
Absolutely.
Excellent. So if you would like that as a tool, I will make sure that that gets added to the conversation as well too, just so at least you have a framework to work from with that as well.
I've been thinking about that a lot as you've been talking, and when we have like an advisory group online and to be able to create that safe space. So you mentioned saying like a certain way, but I feel like in person, the vibes of the people in the room are so important, and to try and establish relationships on Zoom, I personally find really challenging. Like put a camera in front of me and my awkward. So it's, I don't know, I struggle with how to create the feelings that you're,
Absolutely. And that is a challenge that I think that everybody is kind of real, especially in the world of Zoom fatigue, which is now, I swear it should be a part of the DSM at this point. But at this, when it comes to that, some of that really comes with just being flagrantly honest about the space that you want this to be. One example that I absolutely love is in Alberta, we have something called the Design Lab, and they talk solely about the notion of co-design. And the thing that they do I would say it borders on podcast format, but what is really interesting about the space they bring to start off the conversation is they play 80s music, and everyone is just in the greatest mood. And it's not like they sit there and try to invite you into that space. You're just kind of like, okay, I'm in an environment where I'm tapping my toes and I don't know exactly what to do with it, but they're about to talk about healthcare. I want to hear more. And that's where it's kind of that invitation to draw it in. Sometimes that comes from, like for us within the course, you have 30 people. and you're sitting for 2 hours hearing about Rachel's toast, but you know, at that same time, with that in mind, that humanizes a lot of those experiences. It's literally that hoodie moment where where people just want to draw away from it, and it's kind of offering that space where you're just like, well, we understand when you need to do that, but at the same point, we would love to draw you back and think about what you want to do with that. And so I think to some degree, you can only bring who you are to that space, and if it is who you are as a stone cold weirdo who likes movies and music, bring it to that space, because you will likely find alliances along the way. If you are somebody who likes books or has connections, if you want to play an online game, people will eventually get to that point. But what's challenging about those spaces as well too is that it's, in some cases, it's not just like a singular moment in time. Nobody's swayed in opinion with a single conversation. I mean, very rarely anyways. But when it is an ongoing process, as mentioned in the quote there, the people start to see those connections and they recognize the work no matter the platform in which you do it. Francine, you have time.
I think authenticity is so important, favoring your authentic self. But I also, in terms of being kind to yourself, don't jump into the deep end.
Yep.
So build relationships based around people that you enjoy hanging out with. And it might be controversial to say, because again, in research, we want to be diverse and equitable, and that's all great. You cannot serve those people well enough if you haven't practiced and built your confidence in building relationships with people you like to hang around. So when you're a graduate student or you're doing your postdoc, don't jump into like people that come from a completely different walk of life, because you won't be able to practice your authentic self. So start small, be kind, build partnerships that work, and then you can grow.
Absolutely, completely, 1,000% agree with you. And that's the case as well too for myself. And I will say, like, for my experiences beyond the work that I do some like science communication and social media about things like vaccine hesitancy, which of course I'm used to the notion of getting online death threats, but that's not everybody's cup of tea at that point. So there are definitely aspects of the deep end that can be something that takes work getting used to and connecting with people authentically. But at the same point as well too, that in and of itself is a spectrum of understanding and getting to a point where you can come to whatever goal that you're wishing to meet along the way. So I completely agree with you, Francine.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, go for it.
And I to your question, I think part of it too is like there are small things that you can do, and like for instance, that's starting small and not getting overwhelmed by we have to be best friends right now. I think you get there, but I think like, and we have a slide about this, and I think this goes nicely into it too around, you know, how do you connect with the people on your team? And so bringing your authentic self is doing that self-reflection around, okay, so I want to create a space that's going to be comfortable for people. How do I do that? And so thinking about online. So one of the things that we've done in the course is integrating like a check-in. So I love dogs. You can see how much we love dogs. We do like a sliding scale from like sad dog to happy dog. And at the start of each session, and I do this in my team meetings as well, is like, okay, how are you really doing today? Pop it in the chat box. Are you sad dog today? Are you happy dog? Where are we at? To sort of get a feeling of that everyone's on the same page. So you're not diving right into, okay, we have to get this done. We have 60 minutes and it's all research. It's being able to take 5 to 10 minutes to talk to your team, to see how they're doing, to get a check-in. Like what's going on in their lives, that they're going to be able to come forward and bring their authentic self. And I think in team meetings, like we invite people to, you know, turn their camera off, recognize that some of these meetings happen over the lunch hour, and say like, we'd love to see your face. We know that things are going on, so if you have to eat your lunch, we'd love to see that when you finish. Or, you know, inviting people and just being transparent and communicating those expectations. And also leading the way and role modeling that in your team. I think that there's lots of different ways that you can kind of like create that energy and that excitement and role model that to follow. Because I think if you're doing that, other people will likely follow, and you'll kind of like find the sort of the sort of vibe in your group as well. We've done, so this is an example with one of our now postdoc students, colleague, Linda, who leads the Sibling Youth Advisory Council. And it's a partnership between a research team and siblings who have, so youth who have a sibling with a disability. And what Linda did was they wanted to get together at the end of the year to celebrate all that they had done together, their partnerships. She sent them like an Uber Eats gift card. They all get together online on Zoom and just hung out and ate food together, and it's creating or mimicking that atmosphere within that virtual online setting. So it's kind of thinking outside the box in how you can make a meaningful sort of way that doesn't feel like it's so stuffy. It doesn't have to be all research all the time, all work all the time. It can be really integrating the things that you like into doing with your partners as well.
And in some cases, it's about finding places where you can embed a long-term goal when it comes to the notion of a relationship development. It doesn't always necessarily need to be within the space of a research partnership. It can sometimes be about ensuring that you consistently have a community that is constantly on the way of building, but also learning along the way, and they get to share those experiences with other people and they broker that information on your behalf. I'm a firm believer of the fact that a lot of research partners could be future knowledge mobilization and implementation scientists in the making. And I like to think about that from that lens, because that offers credibility to the idea that a lot of these people are just seeking connection and mentorship along the way. One example that we have within our training program is a knowledge mobilization component where we have a plain language research rounds, and it is currently under revision for a number of reasons. But one of the things that that came out of the idea was that it wasn't about creating a space where it's like this. The important factor here is the mixed methodology we use in order to accomplish our research goal. It was about how understanding the demographic that we are serving are people who often have low resources and low energy for a number of reasons. So they just want access to information and to wrestle with it to some degree to which they're comfortable with. So in that space, you have researchers and clinicians, as well as people with lived experience and parents who all look at this information and they have that opportunity to wrestle with, ask questions, and to all feel like they're a colleague in the room. And that has built over time as well too, to facilitate another extra half an hour that is optional for investigators to hang out with us, but mostly for people who colleagues who also were there to talk about this in the way, because when we would leave conferences, you would always have that like 20 minutes afterwards between the next session where you would grab that cup of coffee and you talk to someone and go, oh my gosh, that was the greatest talk I've ever said, and this is why. And so it offered people that psychological aspect to kind of just decompress in some cases, because some subjects are stressful, but also to network, to understand a person a little bit better who might be working in that particular field. And a lot of times actually investigators do stay because they just want to hear that response. They want to see that reaction as well.
Can I say something?
For sure.
Thank you. So great insights, everyone, and I love listening to your thoughts. I just felt in my journey, when I talk about engagement, I feel that we need a human lens in any engagement. So if we call it a research engagement, or we call it any other committees, quality improvement committees, we need a human lens in every engagement. And what we need is to listen deeply in that process, acknowledge the emotions, and see the strength and the goals they are hoping to receive in that engagement. So when we talk in this partnership, I have my own goals. Sam has her, Ray has her, but we are working towards shared goals together, and we are modeling equity in this context. If you see in the spaces we go, and we're inviting diverse voices, and also creating a space, we are welcoming their thoughts and hopes also. At the same time, when I recognize the strength of other person, I'm also building on the strength of other person. And when I'm building on the strength, I'm not only empowering, but I'm also giving him the strength to stand up and do some critical reflections also, because it's not only self-reflection in the system, it's also critical reflection. You need to challenge the system to get it better. It's not easy to do critical reflection, being honest with you. It's a process, but we really need people. And why we are here today, because there was a critical reflection before us, and that paved the way to come to this stage. So it's a process, but I think you are the champions. You know what is best for you and what can help you. We know our strengths and resources and supports in place. It's just we need someone to just talk to us and shine light on those.
Sam, do you want to speak to, well, we have the dog chart, but
Yeah. This gives you an example of like the dog chart. And I've actually recently switched it up a little bit to refresh because everyone had seen this, and I did. Is anyone like a fan of Schitt's Creek? So I did a Schitt's Creek one around how shitty are you feeling today, on a scale of David to Alexis based on their personalities. And I think you can have fun with it. You can, I think it shows a little bit of your personality. And I can tell people like in interviews and that I love TV. I love Schitt's Creek. I love watching stuff. And like, I invite people to tell me their shows. And I think it's those small moments. It doesn't have to be anything big. It's like me giving a little bit of myself and inviting you to tell me about yourself and creating that mutuality and that human connection. So these are just examples of how we do that in the course. And so that's the dog one. And then on the right, it's kind of like a not great picture. I just took a screenshot of what we use. It's called a team charter. And like Gunjan said, it's really about that expectation and setting up your partnership so that everyone is working towards a shared goal. And on this, we use a Google Doc so that everyone can work on it collaboratively. Is we have like what our pronouns are, what our name is, what are goals for the partnership? And we use this in the course setting, but I've also used it in research teams to understand what people want to get out of the project and what they want to get out of their role on the project. So we ask them about that. And at the bottom, I think I have like a spot for like a fun fact. And I think you can really tailor this to what you want and to your team as well. And this is sort of this overarching idea that I think we're sort of really drilling home in this presentation is that it's really all about expectations and communication. Those tools that we just shared are ways that you can communicate your expectations to the team, ways that you can communicate your needs and hopes to the team. I think a lot of the times I see in the course that like, I want you to do the work, but I also just want you to tell me if you can't. Like, it's okay that if you need extra time, it's okay if you aren't able to do the coursework this week. Just tell me. I really just want to know so that I can do what I can to support you. And I think that translates into our research teams as well. And so this is an image from, we have simulations that we use in the course, and that I was on a team that helped develop them. And this is some research that came out of this, but it's really this idea that like we invite people onto our teams. We want them to feel like they're able to meaningfully contribute. And the way that we do that is through this like underarching idea of setting expectations and communication. That's like basically the secret sauce to all of our partnerships is sort of what we got. And I don't want to say that we found the secret sauce, but that's just the thing that we are seeing most frequently that's coming through, and sort of weaves through everything that we're doing.
And I think when you offer that space as well too, sometimes you don't necessarily know with your partners, they might not know what to say. And I've realized how much I have lacked over the years to some degree understanding how to articulate that. So like I am a neurodivergent individual, but from my experiences, it's actually from my health post-cancer, but also I am a hearing impaired individual. So if we have an in-person thing and I am not being, if someone calls my name, I might not hear you. And it's not about not caring. It's not about not understanding something. It's about literally, I cannot hear you. And so when I say those things out loud and operating in that way, sometimes people need that opportunity to kind of learn and be trained in the idea that if you don't disclose, we can't help. And that really is the root of it all. And so as things move forward, the big question really ends up being what's next in the conversation here. And so we really want to ask the question, if when you are sitting in meetings, what are the things that help you feel comfortable?
Negotiating and having conversation with patient family partners of where they would like it to be hosted, what makes the most comfortable, and how to embody that in the space in which you're gathering.
Absolutely. And could you imagine the difference if there was a whiteboard and they said, hey, like, I'm listening to what you're saying right now, and what we're going to do is I'm going to write them down here, because that in itself is in sort of a quiet version of saying, I'm listening to what you say, and I'm putting it on the board and saying, like, this is me repeating exactly what it is to show you that this is happening, but also say, we're going to devote some time to answering your very important questions along the way. Francine.
One thing that stood out to me from this scenario was, like, without it being said, before anything was said, it was like in people's minds was like, you don't understand. The father was like, you don't understand, my kid can't do this. And the researcher was saying, you don't understand, we need money. And they never said those words, but it came out. So it's like turning that on its head and being like, I don't understand. That's me. Can you open up and explain it to me so that I do understand? And flipping that assumption around on its head to prevent this feeling, this barrier of like, you will never understand what it's like to have a kid who can't do that, and how judgmental it feels that you want to measure something that my kid can't do. Like, just predicting that experience so that it's comfortable right from the get-go.
Experiences to learn that. One was from an anthropologist I had the pleasure to be taught from, and he said this, don't assume, because if you assume, you make an ass out of you. Which is so, like, it was stuck forever with you, and it's just like straight to the core. And when I did a quantitative research in migrant parents who just recently migrated, I felt like, why don't I ask them how they would like me to set this up? And from all parents, 100% of me, listen, come to my place. I have 4 kids, they can play, I can talk to you. And it was the most brilliant experience for me, because I learned how far they have to travel to the hospital, how the public transport system sometimes sucks in the rural areas of Switzerland, how to do that with a kid that is unwell. I learned how they live, how many siblings they have, and all of them were so incredibly kind and friendly, and offered me 5 million cakes and coffee, and just for that it was worth it. So I really feel like this doctor was very courageous of inviting 3 parents at a time, and maybe some of them would have also preferred to be given it at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, and one thing I would really endorse anybody to do as well too, in terms of like, rehab science is one thing. I work in genetics, in terms of like what does that complication afford in this context? And I think about that from, I really wish a lot of people took opportunities to take science communication classes and to really build that skill set to simplify the messaging that you want to convey to people, because that part really ends up being a real approach to trust and connection in many ways. I've seen some wonderful people do it. Like one example that I tell a lot of people about is someone talking about the complications of COVID and the genetic information and how that switches around, between different variants. And she uses the term swippy swappy. And what was funny about that is that you're processing the information, but your brain goes, aha, swippy swappy. In that way, it sounds paternalistic, but at the same point, it's something that's stuck in the head as being something that anchors in somebody's mind and goes, I see where you're getting at here. And so that opportunity to kind of build that skill set, and it helps refine your approach along the way. That's my one recommendation.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. And I think that this was an example of sort of like what not to do. And I think just to reinforce that, like I think you've provided some really good suggestions around how you might do that differently and things that you could do to build trust, because I think that in this scenario, everyone has this responsibility to build trust and to support each other. And so I think that there's a long list, I think, of things that went wrong in this scenario, but I think thinking about, you know, who's coming in, is there, can we go there, asking people to give them the choice if they want to come in, having, you know, one person at a time, having food there, having a whiteboard. I think all of these things help to create that trust.
We have comments.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we have a comment from someone online.
Amazing.
You're certainly welcome to unmute, but you've made a really great point about body language and how that might be an issue while talking to the parents and the communication skills as well. Would you like to elaborate? We can't hear you, Reem, if you're trying to chime in. That's all right. She can't comment at the moment.
She gave such a beautiful comment because this is a deep observation. And being honest with you, when we talk about language, language is not just something we speak, it's something we feel, we sense. So even my gestures can really make a positive impact in engagement, or it can also create maybe not a very safe space for any engagement too. So how we speak, what kind of language are we using makes a lot of difference in engagement. And I see that so true in my experience as a mother, that when just a simple check-in, how are you doing, makes a lot of difference in my life. I feel well supported during that process. And I think that's what we need in the system, you know. It's not just sometimes, conversations are not only sometimes words. It's much more beyond that. How we are really welcoming participants, partners in that space is so vital, and that also comes to nonverbal communication also.
I will add as well to one great way to kind of think about some of these details and kind of work on adoption. Like I started thinking about things that I wanted to change my life, and I started into that weird version of vision boarding. I needed that space to kind of just put messages out in the world. I actually had them in my kitchen. So anytime I crossed into my kitchen, I saw certain messages and I needed that to be kind of connected to. And we all have ways and tools of which we connect to certain ideas or intentions that we have in terms of moving forward with a specific goal in mind. One thing that we have with the course is at the end of 10 weeks, you have an opportunity to collaborate between people with lived experience and researchers, and they create a knowledge tool about family engagement. And you can actually check these out online at canchild.ca/FER course. All of these tools are fully printable, downloadable. Francine, I think you have them as well, if I recall.
Yeah, hi everybody. Sorry, I had a problem with my mic, so I couldn't talk. Yeah, I called. I tried to call. I found out that I can call, and that's great. Yeah. So I think the body language, as I mentioned, and the communication skills could be like very important thing, because I've been there before, and I felt like that was a barrier for me for a while until I practiced, right? And I felt the difference, actually, especially in body language, sitting closer to the parent, sitting on my knees while talking, using a nice tone. All of this like makes a big difference with communication. So yeah, that's what I meant. Thank you.
Here's an excellent point. Anyways, I heard once about psychiatrists in terms of how they set a room was a person was talking about the fact that even the placement of the Kleenex box can sometimes send a message. Mm-hmm. And the difference ended up being, it's one thing to have somebody who risks being emotional in that space. And for me to go and say, here, take one of these, to someone that how that was interpreted was clean yourself up. This is an undignified thing to do, versus having that space and understanding and knowing that this could be an inevitability is being emotional, is to plan for it and having sitting beside a person and saying, this is here for you to use just in case. And it doesn't need to be blatantly saying like this in case you're sad, here you go. But at the same time, understanding that that could be a thing, just have it there. People, it's a social norm to understand the purpose behind it rather than promoting that body language message along the way as well too. But with these KT tools, there's a variety of things that were brought to light in terms of values that people draw from and what that they wanted to communicate along the way. And they are tools, everything from relationship building communication to things like psychological safety and being trauma informed and things like that. And go. Uh-oh. Oh, yeah, you can see there's more of the tools there. Oh, there we go. That's right. All right. So, and some of the other tools that could be potentially in your belt in terms of things that we have available is we have our YouTube channel, which is the FER Knowledge Mobilization Team. We host all of our research rounds episodes on there, but also there is opportunity for extended learning, and that comes from a variety of different flagged subjects that have come across with the course as well too. One that we'll be hosting at the end of March, we are lovingly calling the midpoint, because there is a need to start talking about the fact that people who engage to a larger degree, and I believe it was JAMA, they call them super users, which is a thing that we kind of acknowledge, but we also don't at the same time. These are people who engage to a frequent level, and there's not necessarily anything inherently wrong with that. It just comes to understanding the notion that sometimes those people need new spaces to consider and understand the fact that they have leadership skills that are worth addressing and talking about. And we don't necessarily have a system that really accommodates to that notion as of yet. And with that in mind, we need to think about how we move forward with that. Is there some advocacy surrounding that? Is there a need to talk about funding? Is there a need to consider skill sets for people to understand what that means? Like for myself, I don't partner nearly as much as I used to anymore. My son is passed away in 2020. And so I no longer have a child active in the system. So my time comes with an expiry date, but that also comes with an understanding and self-awareness that I don't want to be a person taking up that space anymore. It's deserving of someone else to make that discovery and walk through that process of catharsis and understanding their value within the notion of partnership. But at the same time, I still need to understand and know where I fit within this world, because to some degree as well too, and this is not my story, this latter aspect that I mentioned, but I think it's very important to mention as well too. I had somebody, a family member I was working with, who had to leave particular circumstances with a partnership because of just life stuff. And that happens, that's entirely fair. But what they mentioned just hurt me right down to the core. And that was, she said, I hope nobody forgets me. And that, I cried. I mean, I am a frequent crier, but that is something that really just emphasized and underlined and exclamation pointed the fact that there is value beyond just the work itself. And that in and of itself is kind of a tenuous thing to kind of consider, but that doesn't mean that that shouldn't be supported in one way. So we need to start talking about some of those harder conversations here as well too, that might not necessarily have answers. And that's why the YouTube channel is kind of a place to start tackling some of those subjects. Another facet to consider here as well too is finding your community, which is not necessarily something that is always within the scope of the poster with the little slips of paper and tearing off, an email address and an expression of interest. And to some degree as well too, there is a need to really kind of consider the variety of different options that could be available to you. These are some that I do share from more of a research standpoint in terms of figuring out where to find people. And sometimes that can come from volunteerism. Sometimes it is finding spaces upon which you can democratize the information that you're working with. There are great organizations like Soapbox Science where you go to community events and you just start talking about your work. And in those spaces, you get that social component as well too. There is the open science philosophy where you can share your things in your social media presence. And that's one thing we also have in the YouTube channel. People kept asking me, how do I communicate on Twitter and TikTok about my work? And I think that there's definitely a space to do that and to be creative, and there are some wonderful people who do that, but that's another facet of the SciComm piece that could be really great for connection. And but also not waiting for diagnosis organizations to come to you and say, hey, you know, we see you do this work, can you present? Offer that to people as well too, and say like, and to think of it from the difference between, in knowledge mobilization, we call it the push and the pull method. Pushing puts that information out in the world. Sometimes coming to an organization brings both the push of the information out into the world, but the invitation as well too, and reciprocation, saying we want you to come and partner with us and continue this work along the way. Because another theme that we want to bring to this conversation as well is the fact that nobody does this work in a bubble, and nobody should, and it's something we are all continuously learning from as well too. So if there's an opportunity for the development of a community of practice within the work that you do with other people, learn. Find those spaces in which you can do that. I know Priscilla does this work as well too from us with the course. It's not just the 10 weeks and you're done. We have newsletters, we have events, we have learning conversations, we have so many ways in which people can reconnect and connect with people and say, hey, do you know anything about this? So it's all about crowdsourcing in many ways, but that space remains with an understanding that the door is always open. And that scope is something that a lot of people don't have a really great understanding of, and in some ways we need to bring people in and help them understand where that fits in the bigger picture of their lives, people with lived experience. My first research conference, the one where I mentioned that hoodie story early on, I found out that a lot of people could not make the event, and the reason was because of privacy regulations. They could not invite people with lived experience because they wanted to make sure that their privacy was a part of it. And to me, that just annoyed the heck out of me. But at the same point as well, too, that's the license of being someone with lived experience, is I can kind of get away with a few things on a few shenanigans. And for me, that ended up being, I invited a bunch of people. And so Family Day became Family Day when people actually had an opportunity and an open invitation. And I actually had a dear friend of mine come. And halfway through a lecture, I could see that they were visibly upset. I thought, oh shoot, I should really go take care of this. And I go out, and this was their first opportunity. And as I mentioned, in terms of the timeline of things that happened with people who engaged, is discovery is a key part of that as well too. And this person saw this and went, this is so new to me. The scope is humongous and the system is broken. What do I do? And I said, think about it this way. You have this giant blank wall, and something in the system or whomever, there was a pervasive message in mind that says, you are the only person who can fix this. Here are some tools. This is the only solution that's available. But the thing is, in reality, they operate with that message because that's the only message that was afforded to them. But at the same time, there's a broader message to be said, is the fact that when we invite more people to collaborate, things can get done. So if you can imagine saying, you are the only person who has an opportunity to paint all this, but in reality, when you can bring your art to a point, like a small section of that, and just put your whole heart into that, that still makes that area yours. That is your proverbial dent in the universe. And when you have that space to talk about it to a larger degree, and you invite other people into that space, that's when they bring their art. And more people bring their art along the way. More people bring their resources. And all of that stuff snowballs. And eventually you have a ginormous work of art that is done by everybody. That's community focused, that's community minded, and community created along the way as well too. And so today we just want to say thank you. This has been a wonderful opportunity. And do you have any questions at this point?
Can I ask you a quick question, if it's okay? So I'm curious to know, we had a session today, and what one thing surprised you today?
Good question.
I think the amount of like kindness and concern for people and like sympathy and empathy and your compassion that you feel for people was Like I could clearly feel it within like 10 minutes of the show. Feeling that from you is really important for me and thinking about like, you know, community-based research and having an advisory group and how I can make others feel that, because I think it's so important. So I think it, you know, I think of safe environments, but you made me like feel something that will stick with me and
That's really wonderful to hear. And in so many ways, you know, the script that you use in your mind in terms of what you share may vary from project to project, but that's because you're learning and evolving along the way. One thing that I picked up with course that I really came to understand, and I mentioned this earlier, is there are so many people who were uncomfortable with the idea of being in a room full of people who have like an extensive amount of letters behind their last name. And I started saying, I said, I'm going to say something a little uncomfortable, but I'm going to say it out loud with the people in the room. I said, you belong here. You might not feel it now, but you belong here. And that might evolve over time. If you want to talk about it to a greater depth in terms of your doubts on the subject, I'm here for you. But I also introduced myself as well as jokingly call myself the academic auntie, because I just want to see everybody succeed. My role is relationship, and so I just want people to be like, there's somebody cheering for you in the background. And I love that. I got to watch Gunjan earlier, like last year, win an award, and I sat in the back going, that's my friend. You know, that sort of energy is the thing that people love to see in that space, but at the same time, I authentically feel that. I really do want people to feel that in that space
And just
too.
to add on, right, you know, see the way, if you see, I am very proud of this, to be honest with you. So we need a space and engagement where we are really cheering for others. We are building on their strengths and making them feel valued and creating a sense of belonging for every one of us. And that's what we need. And if we do that, things can be so much magical, being honest with you. I'm a very optimistic person. So when I see the strengths in other people, I see my own strength. I see we can do so much. We can do so much together. And it's just a self-reflection process for each one of us, but we can do so much.
Absolutely.
Priscilla, you had was there someone online that wanted to?
There wasn't. I was actually going to comment to say that, you know, my biggest takeaway from today's discussion and also participating in the family engagement and research course was that as a researcher, it's incredibly important to know that you can be vulnerable in this situation and to be able to verbalize that within your research team settings, because everyone is an expert around the table. And that's a true opportunity to really, you know, raise those uncomfortable moments and raise those moments of uncertainty and get the support of those around the table, including family, patient partners, or community members, to help support you in solving what that particular issue or question may be. You're not alone in this. That was my biggest takeaway, was to really leverage the experts around the table.
And you know, one thing I really want to say, this is such an important learning for me as well, that when we share our vulnerable experiences, it's not easy to do that. It's not easy, being honest with you. And it took years for me to be vulnerable and share that. But when I do that, I invite other people to share their own vulnerable experiences. And that's what you need in a partnership.
What's a really personal example as well too is nobody likes talking about death. I can't imagine anybody who's like, well, let's chat, you know, in that way. But at the same time, to be in this sphere and have suffered child loss was a spectrum of experiences in terms of relationships. I had people who were like, who do I need to talk to on your behalf? And in some cases it would like, who's, you know, if there was some frustration going on, like, who do I need to raise a hand against, you know, whatever the case may be. But it was support in ways that was guided by my own experiences. And then in some cases, when it came to partnership, I had some experiences where it was like, so I'm really sorry you're sad, but are you gonna come back? And to me, that was kind of like, that is not guided by the experience, it's guided by an agenda. So there are ways to be really honest and vulnerable in that space, and being real about understanding the fact that not everybody has those experiences. But when you say like, I really don't know what to say in this moment, I was more than forgiving and understandable to feel that. But if you felt like you could own that space, like I know all the things and all the right things to say, I'm a little bit more worried about you in that space when you come with that level of confidence. But when you can lay the cards out on the table, that's when there's a lot more compassion, because you're both learning along the way.
I was just gonna ask if there's anyone else that wanted to share something, either that surprised you from the session or that you might come with questions about.
Yeah, I really love what Gunjan said about, having that self-compassion can help you have compassion for others, and it makes total sense. Like, you gotta love yourself before you love others, but I never thought of it, in a different way. Like, yeah, I gotta be kind with yourself, and then you can really show that kind of stuff. And I thought that was big thing.
Absolutely. And the pandemic, I think, was, as we all made that transition to Zoom, was a real test of that understanding, and the fact that kids are going to be home. That's going to be an inevitability, things like that, that researchers likely don't have it all together, just like the rest of us in many ways. So there was sort of like a unintentional, equitable discussion in that way, just with those realities and the things that you're faced with, whatever that may be.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think we have a lot of expectations of like families to come into this with the same sort of thing as researchers, but in that pandemic, like, researchers are coming sort of in the same kind of space, like they have stuff going on at home. I think it kind of made it created an equitable sort of like space where everyone's kind of coming in with this equalizer, like everyone's in COVID, everyone's at home, there are kids. And I think when we do research partnerships in like typical settings, like the researchers in their office, like things are calm, and we have, parents coming in and their lives are chaos sometimes. And it's showing that researchers are humans too, and you have chaos in your lives, and we don't show that to people. We kind of hide behind this sort of like image of what research should be, and it's like opening that up so that you can create like a sort of an equal sense of power. And I think one of the things that I've really taken from Sue Robbins, who is an incredible person and an incredible author, is this idea of power. And it's about, you have to give up power as a leader in spaces to like equalize it. And it's not about, I think, that like one person has power over the other, but to give some of that up and to show that vulnerability as a researcher, that you have to actively take that space and want to create that space.
And for just resource sake, if people are interested in wondering who Sue Robbins is, she is someone who actually worked in the patient engagement sphere in pediatrics as well too, then became a patient. So she has 2 books, Bird's Eye View as well as Ducks in a Row, that talk about compassion and a number of other facets of healthcare experience as well as research. So really great books to kind of ponder along the way. Very cool.
And the coping strategy of many PI is like projecting this exactly to do the opposite. To be more professional, more perfect, like the woman in the video.
And
go directly
Exactly.
straight into non-communication.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
One of the things to go with that I tell trainees often is treat your advisors the same way you want your supervisor to treat you.
I love it.
So when you're having a tough day, your kids are bothering you, can't get that paper to be edited when you need, you want, kindness from your advisor, your supervisor. Think about that, because the power shift changes a little bit when you think about it that way. Kind of supervisors are all asked to be the kind of supervisor.
I love that so much. And conversely from the other side as well too, people like family members don't always necessarily have a scope of understanding how they can conduct themselves in that space as well too. Primary question, like out of almost 10 years of work, I could say the number one question always ends up being, can I ask questions mid-conversation? And the answer I always say is yes. If you do not catch someone in a space where you can insert yourself into the conversation and ask about what the heck is going on, if it's the conversation's too high level, be that loud, annoying person till somebody listens. But at the same point as well too, that's why check-ins are a great, example of just allowing for that space for people to still have that conversation. I have a friend who really hates acronyms in hospital settings, and she was facilitating meetings for a while, and she had a little squirt gun, and anytime anyone used an acronym, she's like, I'm sorry, you get squirted. I'm not always endorsing that as a thing, but that's the feeling that some people get when it comes to feeling excluded in the conversation. And so that's why it's always important to kind of speak with intentionality and to pace a little bit slower in some ways as well too.
I can agree with you. And in this context, since you were saying something, sorry, I just would like you to ask something if it's okay if I have that take-home message. Because one thing that surprised me was the focus you put. I think many researchers would probably show like a theoretic framework, stuff like that. And like how to really make sure it's the real interest, not fake interest. That's a big topic, then we not say, oh yeah, we did community engagement or family engagement, and in reality we didn't. They would probably put a lot of focus on that, but you did none of that. You focused really on how do I make people feel comfortable and put myself in the shoes of the parents. And is it okay if I think, okay, maybe in my research I should focus more on that rather than have like family engagement everywhere in every single step, but just really to see, okay, what makes sense for my particular project? And it's okay if there's not family engagement everywhere, but the family engagement that I do is really well thought through, and I really make this a very safe and comfortable space. And that is what actually is much more in the interest of the families rather than trying to be very, very thorough.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to some measures, well, too, what's really interesting about the space, like some people say, like, I don't have the time, the space, or the opportunity to facilitate certain types of understanding people better. Like for me, I have a very broad understanding, Gunjan as well too, about the disability community for obvious reasons. But for me, one big challenge has been better understanding facets of Indigenous population. I can't help but come from the privileged space that I do, but at the same point, one resource that I offer people, if you can be a little bit tolerant initially of the fact that some social media spaces, obviously, statistically speaking, about half of the information is bogus when it comes to talking about health information. There are spaces where people are more than willing to give up their time to tell their story. That's why, as much as people don't like the idea of things like TikTok, I like it for the fact that I can sit and listen to Indigenous stories because if people are willing to have the energy to put that out into the world. It is my privilege to be able to sit and listen. And I've had wonderful experiences along the way when there was one knowledge keeper that I got to meet, Elder Elsie, who was on there, and she called herself the Techno Hookah because she is, oh gosh, I can't remember, she is mid to late 80s and just talks about Métis culture, and I learned about things about what it means to present blankets and medicine when it comes to building a relationship. All of those things that we wouldn't necessarily have because it's not within the scope of our respective communities. Now you have this kind of free and open space to listen, and you don't necessarily need to say anything. You just need to, they want to be heard. And so go out and hear.
I think that's a great way to end the session. So I want to thank everyone for joining today, our speakers, especially for coming all this way and joining us, our little training hub for our second session. I think we learned a great deal about the importance of building authenticity as well as engagement with family and research. So thank you again. I also want to announce to everyone here, and I'll be sending this out via email as well, that our next session for the Trainee Hub is March the 15th. And at that event, we'll actually be joined in the same room, same time and place by David Kenny and his team. from the Research, Ethics and Regulatory Compliance Office, where we can have a great conversation around the unique complexities around community engaged work and applying for REB ethical clearance. So thank you again for those joining us, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Marvelous.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for